In a galaxy where things are done quickly and efficiently, where old traditions say that the broken must be destroyed, where priests are in charge not because they are wise, but because people are afraid of them. Someone did something that no one else thought they would do. He let go of the blade, he grabbed a wrench. And by doing that, he changed everything. They told Marcus Cole that the machine wasn't worth anything. That it was dead weight, rust and rot. That the only mercy left for something that was broken was a clean, ceremonial end. But when Marcus looked at the shaking pile of rusty metal, he saw something that no priest, overseer, or heartless algorithm had ever thought to look for. He saw a spirit. This is the story of how one man's stubborn, grease-stained kindness woke up a dragon that the galaxy had long since forgotten. And how loud that dragon roared. Everyone in the universe had to listen. Verith Prime smelled like old fear and burnt copper. The first thing Marcus Cole noticed when the transport shuttle landed outside the Outer Ring settlement was a smell that stuck to the back of your throat and wouldn't go away no matter how many times you swallowed. The smell made you think that something important was about to die. Marcus was 34 years old, had broad shoulders and hands that were rough from working with engines that had seen more grease than any amount of scrubbing could get rid of. His jaw was square and had stubble on it that never quite turned into a beard or went away. His brown eyes were plain and unremarkable, but people who knew him said they could find things that other people missed. More information. Cracks in the surface. The difference between something that was really broken and something that just looked broken. He had come to Verith Prime to work. Not too hard. There were always engineers needed in the Outer Ring settlements. The pay was good, but the hours were long, and the galaxy's frontier wasn't a good place for people who were weak or sentimental. Marcus knew all of that. He had been working in the Outer Ring for 11 years, that he didn't expect to get there the week of the Celestial Reckoning. "You picked a good time to show up," said Dara Voss, the head of maintenance operations for the settlement, when she met him at the platform gate. She was a small woman in her mid-40s with short silver hair and a permanent squint from looking at engine cores for too long. She shook Marcus's hand and gave him a hard copy of his assignment brief without stopping. "Come with me." Marcus walked next to her. "What is the Celestial Reckoning?" "Every year," Dara said flatly. "Orders from the High Priest. Every settlement in the Outer Ring is involved. You find your oldest, most broken piece of machinery, whatever has been deemed operationally beyond recovery, and bring it to the Reckoning Square. The overseers of the High Priest run the tests, confirm the classification, and then the machine is taken apart in a ceremonial way." She stopped for a moment. "In public. It is meant to show how committed the galaxy is to being efficient, cutting away the dead weight to make room for progress." Marcus frowned. "So they break machines that work?" "Not working," Dara said sharply. "Not able to get better. There is a difference." Then she stopped again, this time for a little less time, as if she were deciding whether or not to say the next part. "Most of the time." Marcus looked at her from the side. "Usually?" Dara didn't answer right away. She pushed open a heavy, reinforced door and led him into the settlement's main maintenance bay. It was a huge, dark room that was filled with the sound of machines working. Hydraulic lifts, coolant systems, and rows of cars and tools that need repairs. Marcus thought it smelled like home. Oil and metal, as well as the faint smell of live circuits. But Dara led him past everything. Past the neat lines of working tools. Beyond the diagnostic benches and repair stations. All the way to the back corner of the bay behind a partition wall that was rusty and looked like it hadn't been moved in years. And there it was. Marcus stopped moving. The machine was very big. You could still see what it had been, even though it was now lying on its side like a building that had fallen down, with one huge foreleg bent at an angle that suggested catastrophic joint failure. What it was supposed to be. The design was old, at least 100 years old, based on the alloy composition. It was made in a time when machines were made not only for function but also for looks. For meaning that it looked like a dragon. Not in a rude or fancy way. The person who built this machine was very precise. The body was about 40 feet long and made of plates of a dark alloy that may have once been a deep gunmetal gray but was now almost completely covered in rust and oxidation. The neck curved in a long, graceful arc that ended in a head the size of a cargo crate. There were 2 optical sensor housings where the eyes would be, but both of them were broken, and the crystalline lenses were broken into jagged pieces. The wings were folded against the body, and the membrane structures between the skeletal struts were torn and weak. The tail stretched out behind it, half buried under a pile of old junk that someone had apparently just piled on top of it over the years, as if they'd been using the dragon as a shelf. Marcus moved slowly toward it. There was a thick layer of rust dust and oxidation residue on the floor around the machine. This is the fine reddish-brown powder that old alloy sheds when it sits still for too long. As Marcus walked, little clouds of it rose and moved in the low airflow that he asked in a low voice, "What is it?" Not because he couldn't see it, but he wanted to know what it meant. Dara read from a data pad, designation, Class 7 Autonomous Defense Platform. Made about 340 years ago during the Kethran expansion. It was a Guardian unit. Back then, the settlements on the frontier used them as their own security systems. They had AI cores on board that could make decisions on their own and do everything else. She put the datapad down. This one kept the settlement of Harrow's Point safe for about 80 years. After that, Harrow's Point became part of the Interstellar Trade Compact. The compact said that the old Guardian units were no longer needed, so they shut them all down. Shut them down? Marcus said again. Now he was standing right next to the dragon's head. The damage was even worse when you looked at it up close. The alloy plating was badly pitted and corroded, and some parts were completely eaten through by years of oxidation. Rust had fused the joints together. Debris was blocking the fuel intake ports along the neck. There was a fracture in one of the great forelimbs that ran through the main load-bearing strut. It looked like it had been there for a long time. Or just left behind. Dara said, "Same thing." Back then. Marcus bent down to get a better look at the head. It was clear that the optical sensor housings were broken. But he could see the deeper parts behind the broken lens pieces, like the photoreceptor arrays and the processing nodes that connected to the main sensory cortex. They were hurt. But they weren't totally ruined. That he reached out and very gently touched the top of the machine's head, just above the sensor housing with only 2 fingers. The rust was chilly. Cold weather for hundreds of years soaked into the metal. Marcus said, "This is your reckoning candidate." It wasn't a question. The overseers flagged it last month, Dara said. For the first time, her professional flatness cracked a little at the edges, letting something else come through that sounded almost like guilt. Ran the diagnostics from a distance. Said it was operationally beyond repair. In 6 days the high priest will make his decision. They'll bring the ceremonial overseers and do what they do. Slowly Marcus got up. He turned to Dara. "And why are you showing it to me?" Dara looked him in the eye. She held it for a long time. After that, she turned her head and looked at the dragon again. "Because you're the best engineer I've ever seen on paper," she said in a low voice. "And because I've been looking at that machine for 6 years, ever since it was moved to my bay, and I've never been able to make myself agree with the word beyond." She put the data pad under her arm. "I wanted at least one other person to see it before it ends, so I'm showing it to you. That's all there is." Marcus turned to look at the dragon again. In 6 days, the reckoning would happen. He had to make a choice. That first night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in his assigned room in the settlement's engineering residential block, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the dragon. About how the rust had felt when he touched it. About the broken optical sensors, the clogged fuel lines, the fused joints, and the broken strut. About the years of cold, silence, and weight that have built up on top of it. The word beyond. He gave up on sleep at 3 in the morning, put on his work clothes, and went back to the maintenance bay. At that time, the bay was quiet. There were only a few overnight technicians in the far sections, but the back corner, which was the dragon's corner, was empty. Marcus took out a portable work light, put it on a crate next to the machine's head, and sat down on the floor in front of it with his own diagnostic scanner across his knees that he stared at the dragon for a long time without doing anything. Then he began to scan. The diagnostic scanner was a professional-grade tool that Marcus had been carrying for 8 years and had changed so much that it looked nothing like it did when it was new. It could read the composition of the alloy, the strength of the structure, the continuity of the circuits, the charge levels of the power cells, the pressure in the fluid system, and, with the custom AI Cortex interface module, Marcus had spent 2 years working on the outer ring, where he built a machine that could look into the architecture of onboard machine intelligence systems. That last ability was the most important one here. First, Marcus did the structural scans. He wasn't stupid about what he was doing. He needed to know the real numbers before he let himself feel anything about them. The scanner moved over the dragon's body in a set pattern, creating a three-dimensional integrity map on its screen. Marcus watched as the data filled up. The results were not good. That was what he thought would happen. But they weren't, and this was the most important thing. They weren't impossible. The main chassis still had about 62% of its structural integrity left, which was actually more than it looked like. The alloy used to build it was a Kethranera composite that Marcus had read about in old engineering books. It was very dense and made to keep its core load-bearing function even when the surface was badly damaged. The rust and oxidation that made the dragon look like it was almost completely destroyed were mostly just damage to the outer plating. The deep structural parts underneath were damaged but still in place. The systems for the joints were different. The rust and calcium-like mineral deposits from hundreds of years of being in the ground had fused all 27 major articulation joints together. It would be a huge job to break them all free, clean them and relubricate them, but it would be easy mechanical work. No new parts are needed, just time and work. The lines themselves were fine, but the fuel delivery system was clogged the whole time. The machine's old hydrogen fusion cells were dead. They had been slowly losing power for hundreds of years and were now less than 4% full. However, the settlement had the tools to recharge fusion cells. The optical sensors were a real problem. Both units were broken beyond repair. To make replacements, Marcus would have to use parts he found in salvage stock, like photoreceptor arrays and processing nodes that worked with each other. Possible, but not easy. The broken load-bearing strut in the left foreleg needs to be fixed properly. This means cleaning the broken surfaces, putting on a structural bonding compound, and then reinforcing it with a sleeve fitting. A lot of work. Work that requires skill. But possible. Then Marcus pointed his scanner at the AI core. The AI core of a Class 7 autonomous defense platform was kept safe in a heavily armored compartment in the upper chest section. It was protected from damage by 4 layers of armored plating because the designers knew that the intelligence was the most important and irreplaceable part of the whole system. Marcus ran his scanner probe over the access panel and held his breath. It took 40 seconds to scan. Marcus read the results 3 times when they came back. The AI core was broken. Some parts of the memory architecture had broken down beyond repair. The information storage systems had been without power or maintenance for hundreds of years, which had a real effect on them. A lot of the machine's experiential memory was just gone, lost to time's entropy. The language processing modules were very messed up. The tactical systems had broken up badly. But the core reasoning architecture, which was the machine's real mind and the part that made it more than just a program, was only 31% functional. 31%. Not nothing. Not the zero that the High Priest's overseers had said. Marcus put the scanner down very carefully. He put the heels of his hands against his eyes and took a few slow breaths through his nose while he thought about what he was seeing. The overseers had done a quick check of the surface. They had seen the terrible damage to the outside, the dead power cells and the broken sensors, and they had stopped. They hadn't looked into the core. Why would they? It looked like the machine was completely dead. In their framework of efficiency, productivity, and cost-benefit analysis, a machine that looked this bad wasn't worth the time it took to look deeper. They weren't looking for a soul. Marcus grabbed his scanner again. He carefully made his way to the Cortex interface module and started a deep probe handshake with the AI core. The protocol for the handshake lasted 3 minutes. Marcus didn't breathe as he watched the progress bar. The screen on the scanner changed after that. There was only one line of text, and it was in the simple output format of a very old machine intelligence that was trying to talk through language processing systems that were badly broken. Query. Marcus stared at those 2 words for a long time. Then he slowly typed back on the scanner's input interface. Marcus is my name. I work as an engineer. I can help you. It took almost a full minute for the answer to come. When it came, it was broken up. Obviously, the language architecture was having trouble putting together coherent output from broken parts. Understood. Marcus. Long time. Marcus felt something move in his chest. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he knew the feeling of being at a fork in the road and knowing that the choice you made next would change everything that came after it. That he wrote, "How long have you been awake in there?" Another long break. Always? Some. Not all. Pieces missing. Boldy. Marcus put the scanner on his knee. He looked up at the dragon's face, which had broken optical sensors, rust-eaten plating, and years of damage and neglect. He thought about what it meant to be alive in pieces in the dark for 300 years. You were aware of your existence but too hurt to do anything about it. Waiting. He grabbed the scanner again. He typed, "I'm going to fix you. Will be hard and take time. But I'm going to help you. Okay?" The longest break so far. Marcus thought about that for a while. He typed, "Because you're not beyond recovery. No matter what anyone else said." He got up. It was close to 5 in the morning. In 6 days the reckoning would happen. He had a lot of work to do and not much time to do it in. On the 6th day the high priest's overseers would show up for the ceremony. If the dragon wasn't working before they got there, it wouldn't matter what Marcus had found in the AI core. No matter what, they would take it apart. He got his scanner and tools together. He looked at the scanner screen one last time. While he was standing up, a last message had come through. Understood. Marcus. I will. Try in the empty maintenance bay. Marcus let himself smile a little bit. Then he got to work. The first day was hard. Not yet did Marcus ask for help. Before he got anyone else involved, he needed to know everything about the job and, even more importantly, the political reality of what he was doing. Dara had shown him the dragon in secret. She hadn't told him to fix it in so many words. She also didn't tell him not to. Marcus chose to work quietly in that space between what was said and what was meant for as long as he could. He began with the fuel system because it was the key to everything else. None of the other systems could be tested or calibrated without power. He couldn't tell which repairs were working and which needed to be redone without systems that had been tested and calibrated. The dragon's neck had fuel intake ports that were blocked by a thick mix of dust, oxidation residue, and what Marcus's scanner said were the hardened remains of an old lubricant that had dried and crystallized over the years into something that looked like concrete. Marcus worked on the fuel lines for 12 hours straight, using a series of smaller and smaller hydropressure tools to break up the blockages and flush them out. He worked slowly, going from the intake ports to the primary delivery manifold and then into the distribution network that fed the fusion cells. The fuel system was clean by the end of the first day. The lines were still there. The fusion cells were still low on power, but for the first time in hundreds of years, they were connected to a working delivery system. That night, Marcus quietly sent a request to the settlement's supply inventory for a charging unit for a fusion cell with a lot of power. He said the reason was calibration testing for scheduled maintenance diagnostic. No one asked about it. Settlement engineers asked for equipment all the time. The joints were on day 2. All 27 of them. Marcus came up with a plan. To begin, he put a chemical loosening compound on the joint housing. This was a heavy industrial formula that reacted with the rust and mineral deposits and started to break them down at the molecular level. He let that sit for 2 hours for each joint, and then he used a combination of manual torque tools and a low-frequency vibration applicator to physically break the fusion. After that, he used a wire brush attachment and a solvent wash to clean the joint surfaces. He then checked the bearing parts underneath for damage, replaced anything that needed to be replaced from the settlement's standard parts stock, and packed the joint with new lubricant before moving on to the next 1.27 joints. At least 2 hours each. On the second day, Marcus worked for 16 hours and finished 19 joints. He came back on the third day in the morning, and finished the last 8 before moving on to the structural repairs. Fixing the broken strut in the left foreleg was the hardest single job on the whole project. Marcus had to get to the inside of the foreleg, which meant carefully taking off the outer armor plating. This was a long process because the fastening hardware was corroded in different ways, and each one had to be treated separately. After taking off the plating and exposing the fracture, he spent 2 hours cleaning the fracture surfaces with a precision abrasion tool, getting rid of all signs of rust and dirt until he was down to clean alloy on both sides. Then he mixed and applied a structural bonding compound that was rated for Kethron-era alloy composition and held the fracture together while it cured. He made a reinforcement sleeve out of a piece of compatible alloy stock he found in the settlement's salvage bin while the bonding compound was setting. He then machined it to fit on the settlement's small lathe and put it over the repaired fracture. Once the bonding compound had fully cured, the fix was strong. Not nice, but strong. Marcus kept his diagnostic scanner connected to the AI core the whole time, even during breaks, spare time, and the hour he spent waiting for compounds to cure or tools to cycle. He spoke to it. Not always through the scanner's text interface. Sometimes he just talked out loud like a good teacher explaining what he was doing and why to a student watching over his shoulder. He didn't know how much the machine could handle with its broken language systems. But he still talked. He'd say, "Okay," as he worked a torque wrench into a joint housing, "this is your left shoulder articulation. The bearing surface down here is in great shape. The person who built you knew how to put the parts together. The rust is only on the surface. Once I put the lubricant back in, this joint will work just fine." Or, "I'm using this structural bonding compound on your leg. It can handle a tensile load of about 400 kilonewtons, which is more than enough for the normal stresses that would be put on this strut. I'm putting the sleeve on top just to give you a little extra protection. I'm not going to do this job halfway." Sometimes the scanner would show a response. Always short ones because the language system was still too broken for anything complicated. But they did come. Understood. Interesting. It hurts less now. This one on day 2 when Marcus finished the last of the fuel line work. He sat with that one for a long time. "You are careful." On day 3 while he was working the foreleg strut, on the third night, Marcus focused on the optical sensors. This was the problem he was most unsure about. It wasn't easy to design and build functional optical sensor replacements for a 300-year-old machine using only parts he could find in a frontier settlement. The original sensor design was from the Kethron era, which meant that the photoreceptor arrays used a wavelength response profile and a signal encoding format that did not work with any modern off-the-shelf parts. On the third day, Marcus spent 4 hours going through the salvage inventory of the settlement with a fine-tooth comb. He wanted photoreceptor arrays from any generation of hardware that could respond to wavelengths that were similar to those of the Kethron standard. He found 3 possible candidates, but none of them were perfect and all of them needed some changes. He took all 3 of them back to his workbench and started to figure out how to make an adapter. Marcus loved this part of engineering the most. Not the clear-cut problems with known answers. The ones that were made up. The ones that made you look at what you had and figure out how to get through. He stayed up all night making adapter circuits that would change the modern photoreceptor signals into Kethron format encoding that the AI core's sensory cortex could understand. By the morning of day 4 he had 2 working sensor units. They weren't exactly what he had planned, but they were tested and working and within the range of what the AI core's sensory processing systems could handle. He carefully put them in, cleaning out the broken pieces of the old lenses and using custom mounting brackets he made from scrap metal to fit the new units into the sensor housings. He ran the signal cables back through the neck to the cortex connection points and made the final connections with the skill of someone who knew this wasn't a technical issue he was fixing. He took a step back. He hooked up his scanner to the AI core. He typed, "I've put in the new optical sensors. I'm going to ask you to try to turn them on." It could be confusing because the response profile isn't the same as your original sensors, so what you see might not look exactly like what you remember. That's normal. Tell me what you're going through. A long wait. Activate another pause. Longer. Then, I can see why. Marcus looked up at the head of the dragon. The new optical sensors were on. He could see a faint glow coming from them, a deep amber glow that hadn't been there before. The machine was watching him. You are smaller than I thought, came the next note. Marcus laughed. A short burst of real laughter came out of him all of a sudden in the quiet maintenance bay. He put a hand over his mouth because he was embarrassed by how hard the feeling hit him. "Yeah," he said out loud. "I hear that a lot." Marcus didn't know how to respond. He stood there for a moment looking up at those amber sensor eyes. He then nodded once, a small nod, and picked up his tools. "2 more days," he said. "Then we'll see if you can get up." On the 5th day, Marcus ran into a problem he hadn't seen coming. People had heard. He wasn't sure how it happened. The overnight technicians might have seen the work being done in the back corner, or someone might have checked the supply requests and connected the charging unit to the dragon. Or maybe the sounds of repair work over 4 days had just gotten enough attention. No matter how it happened, when Marcus got to the maintenance bay on the morning of day 5, there were a few settlement workers standing near the corroded partition wall and watching. Overseer Verith was with them. Overseer Verith was the high priest's local representative on Verith Prime. He was a tall, thin man who acted cold and unhurried, as if he had complete authority and had never needed to prove it through something as crude as anger. He was wearing the gray uniform of the Celestial Order's Oversight Corps and carrying a data pad that Marcus thought held the official diagnostic report that said the dragon was beyond recovery. Dara Voss was next to him, and her face was blank and careful, like someone who was choosing their words very carefully. "Engineer Cole," Overseer Verith said as Marcus walked in. In a way his voice was neutral, but it wasn't really neutral at all. "I've been looking over your supply requests." Marcus said, "Good morning." He kept walking toward the dragon's corner and put his tools down on the work crate. "What can I do for you? You can tell me what you're doing with a machine that has been officially classified and scheduled for celestial reckoning in about 26 hours. Marcus turned to look at him. The people who lived in the settlement and were watching from the partition wall were very quiet. "I'm fixing it," Marcus said. Verith stared at him for a moment. "The machine has been put in the category of operationally beyond recovery. Repair work on a reckoning designated unit is based on an incomplete diagnostic," Marcus said. "Your bosses did a quick scan of the surface. They didn't look into the AI core. The damage on the outside was enough to, and I've been talking to it for 4 days." The quiet in the maintenance bay changed. It got thicker. Verith's face didn't change, but something behind his eyes moved, a new calculation. "Have you been talking to the unit's AI system?" "With the dragon," Marcus said, picking the word on purpose. "Yes." Verith looked at the dragon. It seems like they really looked at it for the first time. Marcus watched him take in the changes. The clean fuel ports, the repaired joints that were now moving slightly in the ventilation current instead of being frozen solid, the new optical sensors that glowed amber, and the fact that the scrap pile that had been on the machine's back for years was gone. The machine had a different look. It seemed alive in a way that it hadn't in 5 days. "Engineer Cole," Verith said carefully, "the reckoning is not a hassle for the government. It is a basic part of the Celestial Order. The High Priest has chosen this unit to be sacrificed." "Exile from Outer Ring settlements, I know," Marcus said. "Interfering with a designated sacrifice is against compact law. I've read the code." He looked Verith in the eye. "I told you the diagnosis was wrong. The machine can still be fixed. I can show you." Give me until tomorrow morning and I'll show you. The reckoning starts tomorrow at noon. Then let me have until noon tomorrow. Another quiet moment. Daravos spoke very softly from Verith's side. Under Compact Engineering Standards Article 14, he has the right to contest the diagnosis. Before a scheduled reckoning can go ahead, an engineer who has shown they can get more diagnostic data has 14 hours to file a formal contest. He looked at her. Then back to Marcus. He was doing political math, figuring out how much it would cost him to not take part in a formal contest and how much it would cost him if he tried to stop it from happening. 14 hours, Verith said. The reckoning will go on as planned if the unit can't show that it works at the contest review tomorrow morning. He looked at the dragon one more time. And Engineer Cole, if you're wrong about this, you'll be on a ship off Verith Prime before the ceremony is over. He turned around and left. The settlement workers who were watching moved out of the way for him, but they stayed where they were and looked at Marcus. Marcus turned back to the dragon and said, "Okay. This is happening today." He typed into the scanner, "Please help me with this. We have around 14 hours. I need to turn on the fusion cells." "Good." Marcus grabbed the cable for the charging unit. "Let's get started then." It took 8 hours to charge the fusion cell at the highest safe rate. Marcus kept an eye on it all the time, watching the power level indicators rise with the focused attention of someone who knew exactly what those numbers meant. 40%. 55. 70. He figured that 70% of the capacity would be enough for a basic operational demonstration, which would include full locomotion, sensory systems, and communication. Enough to show that the dragon was still alive. Marcus worked on the last mechanical prep while the cells charged. He cycled all 27 joints through their full range of motion to make sure the lubrication had spread evenly, checked the fuel delivery lines one more time, and tested the structural repair on the foreleg strut under loads that got heavier and heavier. The workers at the settlement stayed. More people came as the day went on. In small, isolated communities, news spreads quickly and can't be stopped. There were 40 or 50 people watching by late afternoon, standing around the partition wall. Most of the time they were quiet. Some of them had been there for hours. Marcus knew about them. He didn't talk to them. He did work. The fusion cells reached 72% at 9 hours after sunrise, which was 3 hours before the contest review. Marcus unplugged the charging unit. He stood up straight, rolled his shoulders, and stared at the dragon. He said out loud, "Power systems are charged," so the scanner could hear him. "All joints are free and well-oiled. It is clear that fuel delivery is happening. There are optical sensors online. The structure is strong enough for basic movement." He stopped. "Please try to stand up. Take it easy. Your joints have been fused for 300 years and your muscles, your actuator systems, have been dormant for the same amount of time. We'll do it in steps." "Okay." The scanner said, "Good. Start with the neck." The first movement was so slow it hurt. The great neck, which was made of 40 feet of articulated alloy and had never been cleaned or oiled in 300 years, started to rise. It shook because it was so hard. The actuator systems, which had been dormant for a while, stuttered and caught on, slowly finding their rhythm. The people who worked in the settlement had stopped talking completely. The neck rose. Not all the way. The dragon stopped with its head about halfway up, and the amber optical sensors slowly scanned the maintenance bay, finding light, shape, and space for what was basically the first time. "It is large," came the message on the scanner. "I forgot how big the world is." "Yes," Marcus asked. "Keep going. Try the front legs." The repaired left foreleg moved first. The fix worked. The strut held the weight well, and the bonding compound and sleeve stayed in place as the leg moved and the machine shifted its weight. Next came the right foreleg. The dragon started to rise, and it made a sound like a deep metallic groan that seemed to come from below the range of normal hearing. It was more felt than heard. The crowd that was watching made a noise. It wasn't words, It was just a sound that came from 40 people who were seeing something they hadn't expected to believe in. The dragon rose. Not perfectly. The movement was slow and a little shaky because the systems were still warming up and calibrating after being still for hundreds of years. But it stayed. All 4 limbs are holding up weight. The neck stretched all the way up, and the head brushed against the high ceiling of the maintenance bay. The long tail slowly swept across the floor, leaving a long curve in the rust dust. The amber sensors turned and saw Marcus. "Marcus," the message said. "Yeah," he said. His voice sounded rougher than he meant it to. "Yeah," he said again. "You are." The dragon slowly lowered its head until its armored skull was level with Marcus's face, with the amber optical sensors 6 feet away from his eyes. Marcus didn't move back. He stood his ground and looked straight at those amber lights. And the machine gently pressed the flat of its foreleg against Marcus's arm with a level of accuracy that showed it was doing so on purpose. Not hard. Just a little bit. The machine's haptic pressure was the only way it could say what it wanted to say. Marcus touched the machine's foreleg and said, "You're welcome." Overseer Verith got to the contest review at dawn. He didn't come by himself. 6 members of the High Priest's Enforcement Corps followed him. They were big men in armored gray uniforms who stood at the entrance to the maintenance bay like people who were used to things going a certain way. Verith also brought along 2 of the Celestial Order's top diagnostic technicians, who were carrying their own tools, and a junior administrative officer whose job seemed to be to write down everything that happened. Verith didn't expect that by the time he got there, about 120 people from the settlement would be standing around the dragon in the maintenance bay. They weren't organized. There hadn't been any calls for a meeting or notices sent out. Over the course of the night, they had come in 1s and 2s and small groups, drawn by the word that had spread through the settlement since yesterday afternoon. There were workers, technicians, families, and older people who lived on Verith Prime before most of the younger workers were born. They stood still in the maintenance bay, making their presence known in a simple, physical way. When Verith saw the crowd, he stopped. He looked it over. He pressed his lips together just a little bit. Then he moved ahead. Marcus was in front of the dragon. The machine was standing straight up behind him, with the amber sensors on and the big head turned slightly toward the entrance, watching the new people with calm, steady attention. Verith said, "Engineer Cole. The review of the contest will now begin." "Whenever you're ready," Marcus said. The diagnostic technicians from Verith moved forward with their tools. They did their scans, which were clearly more thorough than the first assessment, and Marcus watched their faces as the data came back. He saw the moment they got to the AI core reading. Saw one of them look up at her coworker with a look that said the numbers weren't what she'd been told to expect. It took 40 minutes to read the review. After it was done, the senior technician walked over to Verith and spoke to him in a low voice. Verith didn't show any emotion as he listened. After that, he turned to Marcus. He said, "The unit has 33% AI core functionality and has shown basic operational mobility." Pause. The first diagnosis was not complete. Marcus said, "Yes, it was." For a moment, Verith was quiet. The administrative officer was writing down everything. The members of the enforcement corps standing at the door were very still. Verith said slowly, "Engineer Cole, even if we disagree on the diagnosis, the High Priest's authority over reckoning designations does not depend on the accuracy of the diagnosis. A reckoning is a ritual, and the designated unit does not have to be truly non-functional for the designation to have authority." The maintenance bay was very quiet. Marcus stared at Verith for a long time. Then he moved a little to the side so that Verith could see the dragon clearly. "Ask it," Marcus said. Verith frowned. "I'm sorry?" Marcus said, "Ask the dragon what it thinks about the reckoning. It has a voice and thoughts. Ask it." Verith stared at the dragon. The amber sensors turned to look at him. There was a long, hard silence. Marcus raised his scanner. "I'll pass it on." He typed to the dragon, "The overseer is here." He says that the reckoning has power over you no matter what. What do you want to tell him? The answer came slowly. The language systems were still broken and still being rebuilt. But the words did come. Oversee. Verith was staring at the scanner screen that Marcus had turned to look at him. I have been here for 300 years. I have known. For a long time. I've heard your rituals before. They've taken people like me before. I am not scared of your reckoning. But I will say this. Your ritual has never made anything. This man, Marcus, gave me back my sight in 6 days. Your order, in 300 years, couldn't do the same. I ask you, Overseer, which is the stronger power? There was no noise at all in the maintenance bay. Verith read what was on the scanner screen. He read them again. Something changed on his face, but it wasn't a big change or a sudden conversion. Something more real and quiet than that. Something that looked like a man who had gotten into an argument he wasn't ready to deal with. He looked up at the dragon's face. The amber sensors stared at him without blinking. People in the maintenance bay watched and waited. Verith put his datapad down. He said, "The contest is granted." His voice was steady. "The designation is on hold until the High Priest's Council formally reviews it." He turned to Marcus. "You know that this isn't a permanent solution. The Council will meet again in 30 days to make a final decision." "I get it," Marcus said. "And Engineer Cole?" Verith stopped. It looked like he was carefully picking his next words. "Whatever the Council decides, the diagnostic record will show exactly what was found here today." He looked at his administrative officer. "Everything." He turned around and left. His enforcement team followed. Next came the diagnostic technicians. The last person to leave was the administrative officer. He was still recording and looked back at the dragon as he walked through the door. The people in the maintenance bay were quiet for a moment after they left. And then someone, Marcus never found out who, never could identify the voice, started to clap. It spread through the room like fire through dry grass. Marcus stood in front of the dragon and let the noise wash over him. He felt tired and lighter than he had in years, as well as something else that was in between those two feelings. The feeling that he had done the right thing in a way that really mattered. That didn't happen as often as people said it would. He felt a light push on his shoulder. He raised his head. The dragon had bent down and lightly rested the flat of its snout on Marcus's shoulder. A little bit. Just a little bit. Marcus reached up and touched the armored nose with his hand. "We're not done," he said. 30 days until the council makes a decision." Enough time came back on the scanner. "You work fast." Marcus laughed. He said, "I need more parts that I can find. I know where there is salvage. I mapped out this settlement in the dark while I was waiting." 300 years of recon, Marcus said. "That's really helpful actually. I had time." 3 weeks later, the Council of the High Priest met to talk about their review. They sent Verith Prime their best diagnostic team, not the junior technicians Verith had brought. Instead, they sent the top-level specialists that the Order kept for cases with a lot of political weight. They came expecting a simple case. A relic that was only partly working and that an engineer had fixed up. What they found was different. Marcus had kept working for more than 21 days. The dragon's AI core had been getting stronger and stronger as Marcus's outside repairs worked with the machine's own self-repair processes, which had been dormant for hundreds of years but were now working again thanks to the restored power supply. The language systems had rebuilt themselves to the point where communication was quick and easy. The sensory and tactical systems were working again. The wing membrane structures had been fixed. Marcus had worked on them by himself for 6 days, making new membrane material from a composite he had made just for this purpose and learning from old technical documents how to attach it to the wing strut framework. Dr. Yeva Strand, the head of the diagnostic team and a woman who had been evaluating machine intelligence systems for 30 years, spent 4 hours doing her evaluation. When she was done, she sat down with Marcus in the maintenance bay, where the dragon was also present and listening, and read her results out loud. The core functionality of AI is 78% and getting better all the time. Confirmed full operational mobility. Sensory systems. All main systems are working and some secondary systems are working better. Ability to talk to each other. Full natural language, both text and audio. Dr. Strand put down her datapad. She stared at the dragon. She glanced at Marcus. I've looked at 317 reckoning cases in my career, she said. I've never seen a reversal. Marcus said, there's a first time for everything. Dr. Strand looked at the dragon once more. She asked it directly, what do you want? If the council agrees with you, what do you really want? The voice synthesizer that Marcus had hooked up to the audio system was made from old parts and sounded rough and mechanical, but it was clear that it was expressing something. 300 years of silence, then it starts to make noise again. It said, I want to do what I was made to do. I want to protect this settlement. I want to be helpful. There was a pause. I want to stay. For a moment, Dr. Strand was quiet. After that, she wrote something down on her datapad. I'll send my recommendation to the council, she said. I think you'll like it. She stood up and held out her hand to Marcus. He shook it. She said, you did something here that I really didn't think was possible. I just fixed what was broken, Marcus said. She shook her head a little. You did more than that. She looked at the dragon one last time. You proved something, she said as she picked up her kit and walked to the door. Then she stopped without looking back. For what it's worth, Engineer Cole, the High Priest doesn't like being wrong. Be careful. She went away. Marcus looked up at the dragon. You heard her, he said. Yes, the dragon said. I heard her. Are you scared? A break. The amber sensors moved slowly across the maintenance bay, taking in the tools on the workbenches, the settlement workers going about their day through the open bay doors, and the pale light of Verith Prime's sun coming through the high windows. I've been scared before, the dragon said. In the dark. In the cold. When I didn't know if anyone would ever come. Another pause. I'm not as scared now. Marcus nodded his head slowly. Me too, he said. 12 days later, the council made its decision. It was short for Celestial Order Administrative Documents. It admitted that there was a disagreement about the diagnosis. It recognized the operational functionality that had been shown. In careful bureaucratic language that still made the point clear, it said that the original reckoning designation had been based on an incomplete assessment. The title was taken away. And in the last paragraph, which Dr. Strand would later tell Marcus she had personally pushed for, the ruling set up a new category for the Outer Ring settlement records. Not defense platform. Not operational machinery. Guardian of the settlement. Verith Prime got a dragon 6 months after Marcus Cole got there. On clear nights, it stood at the settlement's eastern edge, with amber sensors sweeping the horizon with calm, patient attention. The kids in the settlement gave it a name that stuck, not any of the technical terms or classification numbers. They named it Caro. Marcus had done that without meaning to. He had used the word once in the maintenance bay when he was talking to it through the scanner, just a short, easy sound that fit the rhythm of the conversation. The machine had taken it on. The settlement had come after. Caro. It had a voice now, fully rebuilt, and it could show emotion and warmth in ways that still surprised Marcus when he wasn't expecting it. It knew the names of everyone who lived on Verith Prime. 300 years of watching people in the dark had given it an incredible amount of patience for studying people, and 6 months of being awake and present had filled that patience with real love. It remembered birthdays. It could tell when someone was having a rough week. It had decided all on its own to read to the youngest kids in the settlement every night. It would sit at the eastern gate with its head down to their level, the amber sensors warm in the fading light, while small kids sat in a semicircle in front of it and listened. When that happened, Marcus would sometimes watch from far away. He would think about what beyond meant. He would think about the people in charge who had looked at a shaky pile of rusty metal and only seen what it could no longer do. He would think about the two words that had shown up on his scanner screen at 5 in the morning in a dark maintenance bay. Who? And he would think, that question needs an answer. It has always needed an answer. The High Priest's Council met 3 more times in the year after that, each time looking at the Caro case in light of other reckoning designations that were still open. The arguments were very heated. The politics were hard to understand. Things were moving slowly. But it did move. Dara Voss was chosen to be on the Council's new Technical Review Committee. She is the first settlement engineer in Outer Ring history to work for the Celestial Order. She took the job with the same flat, controlled look she brought to everything else. Then, at her first committee meeting, she methodically tore apart the diagnostic protocols that had put Caro in the beyond recovery category. Marcus stayed on Verith Prime. He hadn't planned to stay. He had always planned to move on after a job was done. But he discovered that the work was not finished. There was always more to do. More systems that needed fixing. More machines that the official reports had given up on before anyone had thought to look deeper. And there was Caro. 6 months after the Council's decision, Marcus was sitting on an upturned crate at the eastern gate one evening, doing paperwork in the fading light. Caro was close by in its usual evening spot, and the amber sensors were slowly moving across the horizon. Marcus, Caro said. Yes. Dr. Strand was right. The High Priest is not done with us yet. Marcus stopped working on his papers. You know something specific? Caro said, I have been keeping an eye on the Celestial Order's communication frequencies. I mapped their relay signatures during my 3 centuries of observation. They have sent a formal inquiry to the Council requesting documentation of my current capability assessment. Pause. They are thinking about whether or not to fight the decision. For a moment, Marcus was quiet. How long do we have? Unknown. But I think they will want to move before the new Technical Review Committee sets a precedent. Marcus put his papers down. He looked out at the horizon where Caro's sensors were pointed. The wide, rust-colored plains of Verith Prime stretched out under the evening sky. Are you worried? He asked. The same thing he had asked before. Caro said, no. And then, after a moment, it said in a voice that sounded very warm, I know someone who is very good at fixing things. Marcus looked up at the amber lights. The amber sensors stared back at him. Yes, he said. We'll work it out. He picked up his papers. The sun set over Verith Prime. Caro looked at the dark. The High Priest got his power from a simple idea. That the broken should be killed. That age is a sign of weakness. That harm is a failure. That the only mercy for something old and rusty is a clean end. And for 300 years no one asked any questions. A man with greasy hands and a diagnostic scanner looked at a shaking pile of rusted metal and asked a new question. Not, can this machine be destroyed quickly? But is there still something alive in there? And what he found made everything different. Marcus Cole knew something that the High Priest never did. The things that have lasted the longest hurt are usually the strongest things. A machine that had to deal with 300 years of cold silence and being left alone and still asked, who are you? Is not broken. It is waiting. In a galaxy that cares a lot about getting things done quickly, being productive, and the cold math of what something can do for you right now, the most revolutionary thing is to look at something that the world has given up on and say, I see you, and I'm not going anywhere. That's not being sentimental. That's not a sign of weakness. That is the strongest force in the whole universe. Because a machine that was saved by kindness will fight harder than anything that was ever told to do. Caro didn't protect Verith Prime because it was told to. It chose to protect Verith Prime. And there's no power in the galaxy that can stand up to something that chooses. You already know what to do if this story made you feel something. Sign up. Tell someone who needed to hear it today. And don't forget that sometimes the most important thing you can carry, it's not a weapon. It's a tool.